All right, so there's a topic I wanted to bring up that I notice comes up in counseling and therapy in general. I think it's a pretty normal thing, um, but I think that it can sometimes get in the way or set up the wrong context for what therapy is essentially. Um, so the issue was one of blame, right? So if you're looking at this video and you go to the website, we tend to look at a lot of situations through the eyes of trauma, complex trauma, and oftentimes someone will have a presenting problem, an issue, a suffering in some way, shape, or form, and they're maybe not sure why it's happening. So they try to think of, why is this happening? And the default is usually sort of a top-down approach, right? If I could think differently, I would feel differently. And I think that people generally come to therapy when that has happened so many times and still find themselves back where they started. So then in a trauma type therapy, usually you want to do like a somatic or bottom up, right? In other words, if I address my emotions, if I connect with them, I may start to conceptualize my life and myself a little bit differently. Well, whether someone realizes and comes in because of they know they have trauma, or if they're coming in for another way in which they're suffering, essentially. Obviously, you're going to talk about family history. You're going to want to know about, what shaped this person, how they became who they are, and how they see the world, right? That's the thing that we're sort of working on. And then it comes to situations where someone says, I'm suffering a great deal. I'm having a hard time. And you ask about the family history. And usually one of three things. Either I had a great family, I had great parents. Number two, it was okay. I mean, we had everything we needed. And then number three is somewhere along the spectrum of it was terrible. There was neglect, there was abuse, there was addiction, alcoholism, anything across the board, essentially. So then we get to a place where sometimes it's cultural, and sometimes it is just, like a fish doesn't know they're in water. And we often believe that to justify our own suffering and our own areas in which we're to justify it, we almost have to blame someone. Because if we don't blame someone else, we have to blame ourselves naturally. Now, is that true? Not really. Okay? So we get to a place where someone says, you know what? Something about my life and the way I was raised hurts to this day. It's affecting my relationship. But my mom and dad, or whoever my caretakers were wonderful. They were great. They did everything they possibly could. So I don't really have anything to say about them. And you get to talking, and then we start to get to a place where, like, okay, so nothing bad happened to you, right? Maybe nothing terrible happened inside of you as a result of what happened or didn't happen to you. And then we start talking a little bit about that second part. It may not have been something bad, but maybe there wasn't enough of a good thing that you should have had, right? Or maybe, again, a fish doesn't know he's in water. Maybe you adapted to a situation which wasn't terrible, but nonetheless, it impacted you, right? It changed the way in which you attach to people, in which you adapt to the world around you, in which you respond to stress, okay? So for some of us, it's readily apparent. My parents, X, Y, Z, and maybe they're in a place, and this isn't necessary, but maybe they're in a place where they feel like they need to blame. They need to be angry. They need to be resentful. They need to be outraged. They need to be openly hurt and maybe filled up with disgust and all of this stuff. For some people, that's their process. That's where they're at. But it's not necessary. It's not necessary to go there once ever, essentially. If you don't want to or have to. But for some people, that's part of their process. So as a therapist, as I'm asking about the history, and I'm asking him questions about how you were raised in stressful situations and what maybe seemed normal to you, it's often implied in those questions, oh, the therapist is trying to show me how my parents were abusive or were bad parents. It's not the case. And I think the context of it's not the case is the fact that life is freaking difficult. Okay? So even the most well-adjusted parent, even the parent that has nothing but love in their heart, can still be stressed out. Raising children in any household, a two-income household especially, or just a household which there is life that happens. People die, people lose their jobs, people get sick. Life is full of stressors, and everyone, even the best of us, bring in unconscious stuff into our relationships, whether it's being a parent, whether it's being a partner or a friend, right? So sometimes we can acknowledge where we're hurt. We can acknowledge the bad things that happen, or we can acknowledge the good things that maybe didn't happen enough, or just parts of our temperament as children, as young people, wasn't responded to in a way. We don't have to blame anyone, right? But don't let the idea that it's nobody's fault stop you from honoring the ways in which you are hurt, in which you can look back and say, you know what, man, they love me to death and they did so much for me, but there's something that still sits inside of me. And I'm not even sure what it is. That's why I'm in therapy. And then you get to doing the work and you say, wow, there was this incident, or there was just the way things were in the house. Dad was always stressed out. Mom's parent passed away, whatever it was, things changed after that. Parents, after all, are people too, right? And they struggle in the same ways that we struggle sometimes, okay? So to kind of go back to the whole point of this is, as we're asking about history, as we're asking about parents, we're not trying to find the one who did something bad, right? Sometimes that happens. It's also not for me as a therapist to determine that. It's for us to look at things as they are, look at things holistically, and not ask what happened, but ask why is it that we respond the way we do, right? What is it? What's the adaptation to the suffering I have right now, right? What's the adaptation in the things that are hurting my relationships? And there's always a root to it. There's always some root, or there's some lie that we are responding to. There's something. So when we get to the point, or which is a sort of ongoing process, when we get to the place of revisiting the past, it's not to change the past, right? It's to acknowledge how maybe sometimes things from the past are very much present still, and we don't have to blame anyone. We don't have to. At the same time, for a lot of people, that's also part of the healing process. That's part of what they need to go. This cathartic sort of processing of sadness and anger and rage and grief and all of that. For some people, right? And I'll sit with you, as you go through whatever that process is, if it's there, right? And it may not be a process. It may just be, you know what, man, my parents loved me so much and they did so much for me, but they brought some unconscious things into being parents that I'm having to notice right now. I'm having to deal with. So when it gets to that point in therapy, just to recap, if this is something that you notice is happening to you, don't think that we need to blame. You do what intrinsically, which authentically your healing process needs or wants you to do, right? And sometimes we have someone to blame too. And when I say blame, express our resentment, perhaps, express how we feel that we were mistreated. Sometimes when we have those moments, where we come to a conclusion that we're upset, we're resentful, we feel we were mistreated, we just feel guilty for it. We, in the back of our head, we say, yeah, that didn't feel good. I don't like that. But what right do I have, given everything my parents went through, to say anything negative about them? Right? And that's different for different cultures. Some cultures are more protective of the family as a whole, not wanting to maybe dishonor the parents or the caretakers. Right? So that's another thing. Right? And again, I'm not here to push it. I'm here to say, hey, let's look at this. Let's look at, you feel guilty, right? What is guilt for you? How does it show up? And then maybe we get to a place in which we can express a way in which we feel hurt, right? Or we come to the conclusion that, you know what, it happened. It's unfortunate. They did the best they could. I feel forgiving. I feel compassionate. But now I have to deal with whatever is inside here, right? I have to deal with the reason that I'm sort of showing up in therapy in this process. So when it comes to blame, it's not necessary, but it can be. Okay, and there's a lot there. The whole point is we want to get to the roots of what drives us, of what imprints we've had placed on us. And as we do that bottom up approach, we get in touch with it, right? And we change then the context in which we view ourselves and our families and the world, right? So, the whole process is so graceful, and there's no script to how it goes, right? As when you're in therapy, you are quite literally writing the script, right? And it's completely unique to everyone. So that's all I got for today. Thanks for listening, and feel free to shoot me a message or comment on the video if you have any questions or comments. All right, thanks.